Chapter 28. My place in sculpture. I have often been asked by aspiring sculptors to help them to get on their feet, and not very long after this have had the ironical pleasure of watching them getting large commissions and all sorts of decorative work from sources that would never have come near me. Nor have the aspirants, when safely in the saddle, taken the same interest in my work that they formerly professed. From time to time I have received many miniature versions of my larger works from amateurs who certainly satisfy themselves in this manner, but which I find irritating. What I have dug out of myself with labour they translate into tiny, vague versions working from newspaper photographs, and in their simplicity imagine that I ought to be pleased. These works are always returned to their makers. It is naturally difficult to assess one's place in the period one lives in, perhaps impossible. It is a process similar to painting one's own portrait, or rather to working on a portrait in the round, a really difficult undertaking. The artist usually dramatises himself, and that is why few self-portraits bear the imprint of truth. My outstanding merit in my own eyes is that I believe to be a return in sculpture to the human outlook, without in any way sinking back into the flabby sentimentalising or the merely decorative that went before. From the Cubists onwards, sculpture has tended to become more and more abstract, whether the shape it took was that of the clearness and hardness of machinery, or soft and spongy forms as in Hans Arp, or a combination of both. I fail to see also how the use of novel materials helps, such as glass and tin and strips of lead and stainless steel and aluminium. The use of these materials might add novel and pleasing effects in connection with architecture, but add nothing to the essential meanings of sculpture, which remain fundamental. The spirit is neglected for detail, for ways and means.
Hello, I expect you're wondering why I've gathered you here. Well, it's to tell you about some of the currents in British sculpture in the 20th century and before, actually. And really, British sculpture, as we all know, starts with Rodin in Paris. You've also got the other route of modernism, which is kind of to do with Egyptian art, and as Egypt is on the continent of Africa, it's to do with African art. And we all know that the blues comes from Africa, but not many people recognise that the whole of the roots of modernism actually come from Africa. And they come from Africa in all sorts of ways, but principally in terms of contemporary art, we think of that coming from the influence of African masks and sculpture on Picasso, but that's not all. That's not the only route that an idea about African art reaches the West. But it's a good place to think about. Now, Picasso is kicking around in Paris, and he hangs out with Jacob Epstein. Epstein in turn meets Gaudia Brashka and Brancusi. And all of these people are kicking around Paris, of course, apart from Moore and Hepworth, who are kicking around Bradford. But nevertheless, all these people are icons of modernism, if you like. Interested in abstraction, interested in the future, interested in how the language of modernism constructs the 20th century. And Duchamp is important because he's interested in how those the ideas of modernism can be part of the language of now, if you like. Now in Britain, all this lot, they pick up on different aspects of what that lot are doing. So You've got Michael Craig Martin, this is much later on, but Michael Craig Martin. George Fullard was directly influenced by Picasso. Peter Startup is a sculptor of the same generation of George Fullard, working in the post-war period. You've got Mark E. Smith of The Fall. The Fall's music is very modernistic. It takes the language of, in a way, the language of T.S. Eliot and James Joyce and turns that into some kind of musical aspect. And the music is very sculptural. You've got Elizabeth Frink and Edoardo Palozzi. Now, Edoardo Palozzi is very connected to Epstein. Then you have Brian Eno and his modernist music. Brian Eno tried to make a piece that lasts forever. And then you have David Madala. And I put David Madala in there to reflect an interest in the idea of performance, but also an interest in cultures outside of Europe and their roots of modernism, because David Madala is from the Far East. So anyway, this lot are kind of influenced by this, and I've made a bracket here specifically which links from ideas about Elizabeth Frink and George Fullard through to Gustav Metzger, Christina Mackie, John Thompson, Susan Hiller and Villa de Barlow. Now, in terms of timeline, some of these people could be over here and some of these people could be over here. But in terms of influence, I think there is a genuine relationship between the two. A more conceptual group of artists are these people underneath Control magazine. Now, Control magazine was set up by an artist called Stephen Willits. In a way, that kind of thinking mirrors things to do with Michael Craig Martin up here. But you've also got Helen Chadwick, who was a hugely important figure in British art in the 80s, Lucy Nogueira, and Anish Kapoor. Linking through back to David Madala, and again thinking about all of these people up here, I've got Sonia Boyce, Jessica Vorsanger, and the extraordinary Haroon Mirza, who's working now. So up here, we've got artists working now, and actually, this group of artists here could be up here. So Sonia Boyce, Jessica Vorsanger and Haroon Mirza could be in this list. But I've got Carrie Young, who is an extraordinary conceptual photographer. I've got Eva Rothschild, who's more of an object maker and interested in space. And then I've got the wonderful Anthea Hamilton, whose work really combines, in a way, with Anthea Hamilton's work, who's a very young artist. It really concerns an idea about space and also thinking about the figure. And then I've got myself in here above Roberta Smith. That's hubris. But anyway, these three artists, I think you can see in some way a link that goes back from what Eva Rothschild and Anthea Hamilton does now through perhaps the work of Helen Chadwick and Lucy Nogueira and Sonia Boyce, through David Madala, Elizabeth Frink and Michael Craig Martin, perhaps back to Barbara Hepworth, Epstein, Jacob Epstein and Rodin. And then this is the most important bit. What's going to happen in the future? Is it going to be you? Your art world needs you. So make art. And then you can be on this wall when this gets painted.